Before we begin, I want to extend a quick invitation to you. If you enjoy mystery stories, suspense, and those that keep your mind guessing until the very end, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because each story here can take you to places you may never forget. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I always enjoy seeing how far these stories can go. And who knows? Maybe the next one starts right near you. The road leading to the mansion did not appear on any recent map. It was narrow, forgotten, overgrown with trees that seemed to grow on purpose to hide the path. The old asphalt was cracked, swallowed by thick roots and dark moss. Anyone passing through there without knowing their destination would probably turn back before reaching the end. But Daniel Carter did not return. The car stopped in front of the rusty gates, which still barely held an old coat of arms, faded by time but imposing enough to suggest that this place had once been important. Holloway Manor, abandoned since 1940. Daniel got out of the car without hesitation. He wasn't an adventurer, nor an ordinary curious person. He was a historian, specializing in forgotten properties and erased records. Places like this were his specialty, and often his obsession. The silence around them was unusual. There was no wind, there were no insects, not even the distant sound of cars or life. It was as if that land was isolated from the rest of the world. He pushed open the gate. The creaking was too loud, almost aggressive, breaking a silence that seemed unwilling to be interrupted. Daniel entered. The mansion came into view after a few steps, enormous, imposing, but consumed by neglect. The windows were broken, some covered by rotten boards. The peeling paint revealed ancient layers, as if decades of history were trying to force their way out. But what caught the eye the most was the main door, closed, intact. Unlike the rest of the house, that door seemed preserved. Daniel stopped in front of her. That didn't make sense. If the place had been abandoned for over 80 years, someone should have broken in, looted, destroyed it, but not there. Not at that entrance. He ran his hand along the wood, dust-free, no marks. As if it had been cleaned recently. A shiver ran down the back of his neck, but he didn't back away. He took the gloves out of his backpack, put them on carefully, and turned the doorknob. Locked. Of course. He was expecting it. From the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled out a small toolkit. It wasn't illegal, at least not officially. It was historical access equipment, as he liked to call it. A few minutes later, the lock gave way. The door opened with a dry click. The air that came out from inside wasn't musty or neglected. It was standing still, heavy, too old. Daniel entered. The interior of the mansion was even stranger than the exterior. Furniture covered with sheets was arranged too neatly. The floor, though dusty, showed no signs of recent intrusion. But something was wrong, very wrong. The walls, they were marked, thin, almost invisible lines, like scratches, repeated in patterns that didn't seem random. Daniel approached. He ran his fingers over one of them. These were not signs of wear and tear. They were made, intentional. He kept walking. The main room led to a long corridor where several doors remained closed, all identical, all silent. He chose one. It opened. A room, old, untouched, as if someone had simply left and never returned. The bed was still made. A stopped clock on the table read 2:17. Daniel made a mental note. He went back into the hallway. He opened another door, another room. Equal. Another clock, 2:17, a third one, 2:17. Now he has stopped. That was no coincidence. He walked faster down the hallway, opening other doors, all rooms, all the same. Everyone's clocks are stopped at the same time. 2:17. The air felt heavier now, denser, as if the house were reacting to his presence. Daniel took a deep breath. That was the kind of discovery that could change your career, or destroy your sanity. He returned to the main room, and then he saw a door that wasn't there before. At the end of the hallway, between two smooth walls, A narrow, dark, almost invisible door, as if it had always been there but had never been noticed. Daniel frowned. He was sure of it. Absolute. That door wasn't there when you came in. He approached slowly. Each step seemed more difficult than the last. The doorknob was different from the others, free, metallic, new. He placed his hand on it, and for the first time since he arrived, he hesitated. Something inside him told him to stop. To leave, never to return, but something stronger made him turn the doorknob. The door was not locked. She opened it, effortlessly, and it revealed a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. No end in sight, without any light source, without any sound. Daniel stood still for a few seconds, observing, calculating, breathing faster than I'd like to admit. Then he grabbed his flashlight. He called, and he pointed downwards. The light did not reach the top of the stairs. But it revealed something worse. The walls of that underground corridor were covered with the same scratches, but there they were deeper, more violent, more desperate. Daniel took a step back. For the first time, he thought about leaving, but then he realized something else. Etched into the wall among the scratches there was something different. Words, old, written by force, as if someone had used their own fingernails. He brought the light closer. It's a lion. Don't go down. The silence of the house returned, heavier than before, more alive, and at that moment Daniel understood one thing. The mansion was not abandoned. It never was. Daniel did not come down. Not immediately. He recoiled from the staircase like someone who leans against something hot without realizing it. The warning, "Do not go down," didn't seem like just a common alert. There was urgency there, desperation, something left by someone who probably didn't have a chance to escape. He closed the door. Be careful, as if it could somehow contain whatever was down there. Back in the main room, Daniel took his notebook out of his backpack and began to write everything down. The clock times, the state of the rooms, the door that appeared, the scratches, everything. That was how he kept track, by transforming the unknown into data. But something didn't fit. Holloway Manor was not just a forgotten property. She had been erased. Before coming there, Daniel had spent days researching. The records were scarce, fragmented, and in some cases clearly altered. The name Holloway appeared in old county documents, land records, taxes, but disappeared completely after 1940. No sale, no heirs, without an official investigation. It was as if the entire family had simply ceased to exist, or it has been removed. He closed the notebook for a moment, looking around. That house didn't seem abandoned by chance. It seemed preserved. On purpose, he decided to explore more deeply. The corridor to the right led to a sort of office. The door was ajar. Inside, tall bookshelves covered the walls, still filled with books, something rare in abandoned properties. Daniel ran his fingers through the titles. American history, architecture, engineering, but there was a separate section. No identification. The books there were different. No titles on the spine, all the same. He pulled one out. The interior was not a book. It was a notebook, full of notes, diagrams, symbols and dates, decades of records. The name at the top of several pages was repeated, Edward Holloway. Daniel sat down at the table, opening more pages. The early records were organized, almost scientific. Observations about the house, structural measurements, soil studies. Holloway seemed like a methodical, rational man, but as the pages turned, something changed. The writing became more rushed, irregular. The notes were no longer technical, and they became personal. "They listen," Daniel frowned. "Turn the page. It's not home. It never was. Other. It started at 2:17. He froze. The clock. Everyone scheduling the same time. He turned more pages, now faster. "The sounds come from below. The staircase doesn't end. They're not going up yet." Daniel slammed the notebook shut. He took a deep breath. That wasn't just the account of a paranoid person. It was too consistent, too organized. Even in despair, there was a pattern. And then he realized something else. There were no records of departures, no final notes, no conclusion. As if Edward Holloway had simply stopped writing. Suddenly, without warning, Daniel stood up. I needed more context. He left the office and went to the back of the house where he found the kitchen. Surprisingly intact, except for a thin layer of dust. Cabinets closed, utensils organized. But the most disturbing detail was on the table. Dishes, 4, tidy, as if someone were about to have dinner, or it had been interrupted. Daniel approached slowly. The silverware was aligned with precision. But something was out of place. A chair that fell over, not broken, demolition. He crouched down, examining the ground. Brands, lightweight, dragged, as if someone had been pulled in the direction from the hallway towards the stairs. Daniel stood up quickly. The air felt heavier there. It's harder to breathe. He returned to the main hall, trying to remain calm, think, rationalize, but his attention was drawn to another detail. A portrait on the wall, big, covered in dust. He wiped it with his coat sleeve. A family, 4 people. Edward Holloway, undoubtedly, younger but recognizable by his rigid expression. Next to him, a woman and 2 children, everyone looking directly at the camera, but it was no ordinary portrait. There was something wrong with the eyes, not with everyone, just one. The youngest boy. His eyes were slightly misaligned, as if looking at something behind the photographer, or behind whoever was observing the painting. Daniel felt a chill. He turned around instinctively. Nothing. The house remained silent, but that silence no longer seemed empty. He seemed attentive. He looked at the portrait again, and then he noticed something that wasn't there before. A risk, until recent. Crossing the boy's face, Daniel took a step back. That wasn't there seconds ago. He was sure of it. Absolute. His gaze slowly swept across the room, along the walls, through the doors, until we stop again in the hallway. Deep down, where the door to the stairs was open. He felt his stomach tighten. He had closed it. I was sure of it. The darkness down below seemed even denser now, closer, as if I had climbed a few steps. Daniel said nothing. He didn't move immediately, but something inside him began to change. The curiosity was still there. But now it shared space with something new, something more primitive, fear, and for the first time since he arrived, he began to consider a possibility he had avoided until then. Perhaps that house wasn't just keeping a secret. Perhaps he was waiting. Daniel didn't run, but it didn't just stand still either. His body reacted before his mind. He walked slowly to the door of the staircase, as if any sudden movement could trigger something. Down there. The dark opening seemed larger now, deeper, more present. He stopped a few steps away. He took a deep breath, and then he did something he hadn't done since entering the mansion. He turned on the recorder. Field log, Holloway Mansion, possible unidentified structural alteration. His voice was lower than usual. The basement door was found open after being manually closed. No visible signs of forced entry or external interference. He paused. He listened. Nothing, not even the echo of her own voice. Continuing exploration. He put the recorder back in his pocket and raised the flashlight again. The light filtered through some of the steps. It stopped in the void, like before. But now there was something new. Brands on the steps. They weren't scratches like on the walls. They were impressions, irregular, disorganized. It was as if several people had gone up at the same time, or attempted to climb. Daniel swallowed hard. That didn't match the warning. They're not going up, yet. The word echoed in his mind. Yet he took a step back, but the floor creaked too loudly. The sound spread throughout the house, and he went down the stairs. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, A noise, low, distant, but unmistakable. Something is moving down there. Daniel froze. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. The sound was not continuous. It was irregular, dragged, like something trying to adjust to the movement. He took another step back, and then he turned, moving away from the stairs. Fast, without running, still trying to maintain control. He needed logic. I needed an explanation. He returned to the office almost without realizing it. Edward Holloway's notebooks were open on the table. Daniel began to leaf through them again, now urgently, looking for answers, looking for patterns, and he found it. A sequence of numbered pages with regular date intervals, all marked at 2:17. Each entry described something different. Sounds closer today. The walls respond. They learned. Daniel turned the page. The door appeared for the first time. Other. I must not open it again. Other. They weren't there before. He stopped. He took a deep breath. And then he realized something crucial. Edward wasn't describing something trapped in the basement. He was describing something that was coming. Slowly, progressively, learning. Daniel moved away from the table. The house creaked, a dry sound, coming from upstairs. He looked at the ceiling. Another sound. Steps, boards, deliberate. They weren't there before. Now they were, on the second floor. Daniel instinctively turned off the flashlight. It was left in the dark. My heart is beating too fast. The footsteps continued. An irregular sequence, as if whoever or whatever was walking still didn't have complete control over their own body. A heavier step, another lighter one, dragged. Then silence. Daniel didn't move. Seconds. Too long. Then a new sound, this time behind him, very close. He turned his body quickly, turning on the flashlight. Nothing. The room was empty, the books, the table, the notebooks. But something had changed. One of the notebooks. It was open to a different page. Daniel approached slowly. He hadn't left it like that. I was sure of it. The page contained only one sentence, written in an irregular way, as if it had been done in a hurry, or with pain. You opened it. The air seemed to disappear for a second. Daniel took a step back. The flashlight illuminated the trembling page in his hand. The handwriting wasn't the same as Edward's. It was more recent, more aggressive, more conscious. A crackling sound echoed down the hallway. Then another one, like doors being opened. 1, 2, 3, in sequence. Daniel left the office quickly. The hallway was different. The bedroom doors, all open now, wide open. The darkness within them seemed deeper than it should have been. Denser. And then he saw, at the end of the corridor, something moved, not completely visible, not completely solid, but enough, a silhouette, too high, property for a second, observing, and then she leaned over, incorrectly, as if the body didn't obey human rules, and he disappeared into one of the rooms. Daniel didn't think, he ran, not outside, but in the opposite direction, instinctively avoiding that. The mistake was immediate. The hallway seemed longer now, the most numerous doors. The path to the exit is longer. He arrived in the main room, breathless. But the front door, it was closed. Daniel tried to turn the doorknob. Nothing. Locked. He pulled hard. It hit. He pushed. Nothing. A sound came from the hallway again. Closer. Faster. That's more accurate. Daniel slowly backed away, looking in all directions, trying to decide, escape, to hide, or to descend. His eyes were drawn back to the staircase. The darkness seemed to pulse, as if it were calling, as if it were the only possible way out. And at that moment, a new understanding began to take shape. The house was not only alive, she was driving, pushing, directing his every move, as if I already knew exactly where he would end up. Daniel didn't want to get off the bus, but I also had nowhere to go. The main door remained locked, motionless, as if it had never been opened. The corridor behind it was no longer just a path. It was an active, living, unpredictable threat, and the staircase, it was the only constant. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his logic. If there was an origin for all of that, it was down there. If there was a way out, also. With the flashlight firmly in his hand, Daniel began to descend, step by step. The sound of the footsteps above ceased the moment he placed his foot on the first step, as if something had achieved exactly what it wanted. Silence returned, but it was no relief. It was expected. The staircase seemed longer than before. The steps were uneven, worn down in the center, as if they had been used repeatedly for a long time, or by many people. The walls remained covered in scratches, now even more intense, overlapping, crisscrossing, forming almost chaotic patterns. But there was something new, numbers, small, marked among the risks. Daniel moved the light closer. 1, 2, 3, 4, interrupted sequences, restarted, as attempts at counting, or to maintain sanity. He continued down, and then it came to an end. A narrow corridor stretched ahead, built of rough stone. Unlike the structure of the house above, it was not part of the original construction. It was older, much older. The air was heavy, humid, and difficult to breathe, and there was a smell, iron, earth, and something undefined. Daniel moved forward slowly. The walls of that hallway also had marks, but these weren't just scratches. There were messages. Fragmented, overlapping, written by different hands. Don't listen. They keep repeating you. Don't answer. Daniel stopped. That connected with Edward's notebooks. They learn. He followed. The corridor led to a larger room, a kind of underground chamber. In the center there was a metal structure, old, rusty, but it's still functional. It looked like some kind of containment mechanism, currents, hooks and marks on the floor, as if something had been kept there for a long time. Daniel approached cautiously. The flashlight illuminated the ground, and he saw circular markings overlapping. It was as if several people had been standing there, walking in circles, dams, waiting. But what was most disturbing was the walls surrounding the structure. Photos, fastened with nails, dozens, yellowish. Some almost fell apart. Daniel picked one. It was a portrait, a family, unlike the Holloway family, other, and another one, and another one. Different people, different eras, but they all had something in common. They were taken inside the mansion, and all the photos had a detail. Someone else, always in the background, almost imperceptible, a presence, observing. Daniel swallowed hard. That wasn't just the story of one family. It was a cycle. The mansion was not an isolated location. It was a recurring theme. He dropped the photo, and then he listened, a sound behind him. It wasn't coming from the hallway above, not even the stairs. It came from the room itself, a whisper, low, dragged, almost inaudible. "Daniel!" He froze. My whole body froze. A voice. It was familiar. He turned slowly. Nothing. The room was empty, but the whisper came again. "That's clearer. Daniel, you came." He acknowledged it. It was impossible, but he acknowledged it. The father's voice. Dead for over 10 years. "This isn't real," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Silence. So, an answer. Immediate. Perfect. "I know." Daniel retreated. My heart was racing, but that was no ordinary illusion. The voice wasn't just imitating. She was responding, interacting, learning in real time. "You opened it," the voice said again, now changing its tone slightly. He wasn't exactly the father anymore. It was an approximation. "I didn't open anything," Daniel replied without thinking. Immediate error. The silence that followed was different, denser. Pay closer attention, as if something had received exactly what it needed. So coming from all sides, he responded. The word echoed through the room, repeated, multiplied. He answered. He answered. He answered. Daniel put his hands over his ears, but it was no use. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It came from within. And then he realized something else. The photos on the walls, they had changed. He glanced quickly. One of them. He was showing the room where he was. Current, with the same structure, the same currents. And in the center, he stopped, looking at her own photo. Daniel let go of the flashlight for a second. She fell, spinning on the floor, creating distorted shadows on the walls. When he picked her up again, the photo had changed. Now it showed him looking back, as if something was behind him at that moment, very close. He didn't want to turn around, but it turned around, slowly, controlling every movement. The flashlight illuminated the space behind him, empty, for a second. Just a second. Because then a sound came from the hallway, steps going down the stairs, but things weren't like they used to be. Now they were firm, coordinated, precise, as if only I had learned to walk. The footsteps stopped at the last step. The silence that followed was not empty. He was aware. Daniel didn't move. The lantern flickered slightly, illuminating the entrance to the corridor. The darkness there seemed denser now, as if it had a form, as if it were waiting for the right moment to advance. Then something came up. First, just an outline. Then, slowly, a figure took shape. High, skinny, disproportionate. His arms were too long, hanging unnaturally. His head was slightly tilted, as if trying to understand his own balance. But the worst part wasn't the way it was done. It was the face. Or rather, the faces. The surface of that thing wasn't stable. It was changing. It was reorganizing. For a moment, Daniel saw his father's face. On the other, his own face. Then, faces he had never seen before, overlapping, mixed, as if it were testing possibilities, observing which one worked best. Daniel slowly backed away. The creature took a step forward, perfect, without hesitation. She had learned. No, Daniel murmured, his voice almost inaudibly. Things stopped. His head tilted a little more, and then he spoke, with his voice. No. The echo was identical, flawless, without distortion. Daniel froze, turning my mind, connecting everything, the warnings, the notebooks, the voices, the answers. He understood. It wasn't just a presence. It was a system, something I was observing. He was imitating. It was improving. And it needed one thing to function fully: interaction, answers, conscience. He had given it to him, step by step, from the moment he entered. The creature took another step, closer. The flashlight's light revealed something new. The walls around the room were changing. The scratches, the words, everything seemed to be slowly reorganizing itself, as if the structure itself were reacting to its presence, or by obeying. Daniel took a deep breath. It forced the mind to think. If that was learned through interaction, so every word, every reaction, it was a mistake. He remained silent. Property. The creature also stopped, observing, waiting. Seconds too long. Then the thing did something unexpected. He took a step to the side, and he pointed for the metal structure in the center of the room. The currents, the hooks. Daniel frowned. He didn't understand. The creature repeated the gesture, more insistent, and then he spoke again, with multiple voices at the same time, overlapping. Stay. Daniel felt his stomach churn. That wasn't a request. It was an instruction. And then everything made sense. The photos, families, the records. The mansion wasn't just attracting people. She was filling in. Each person who entered, it fed that, and possibly it was copied, replaced, removed. Daniel looked again at the photos on the wall. Now he could see clearly. In each image, the presence in the background was not merely an observer, it was an imperfect version. in progress, learning. And then he realized something even worse. One of the most recent photos. It showed the entrance to the mansion, with a car parked. His car. Daniel approached slowly. The image was fresh, too recent to be a coincidence, and in the reflection of one of the mansion's windows, in the photo, there was someone standing next to him with the same attitude, the same body, but the face still incomplete. Daniel retreated. The creature in front of him tilted its head again, and for the first time, he smiled. Incorrectly. It's as if he's learned the gesture, but not the meaning. Almost, he said in his own voice. Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. That wasn't just imitation. It was ending. The understanding came as a shock. There were not multiple entities. There was one, just one, that was being rebuilt to each person, to each mind, with each interaction. The mansion, it was just the mechanism, and the basement, it was the core. Daniel looked around, desperate for a way out, but now everything seemed too clear. At the door, the staircase, the warnings, none of that was meant to prevent entry. It was to guarantee the process, filter, prepare, guide. The creature took another step. Now it was just a few meters away. The skin, if it could be called that, rippled slightly, like an unstable surface trying to settle into a definitive shape. "Stay," he repeated, firmer, more precise, more human. Daniel felt something break inside him, not out of fear, but it's about understanding. He wasn't trying to leave a house. He was inside something much bigger, something I didn't need to pursue, because I knew no one who arrived there. Skirt. And at that moment, one last realization emerged. The creature wasn't there to kill him. I was there to... I replaced it. Daniel didn't run. This time, not through control, but because he understood that running wouldn't make a difference. The creature before him showed no hurry. It did not advance aggressively, nor did it attack. It merely observed, like a reflex, waiting for the right moment to become definitive. The worst part wasn't the immediate danger. It was inevitable. Daniel took a deep breath, forcing his body to slow down. If it learned through interaction, then silence was its only advantage, but even that seemed limited. The creature took another step. Now just a few centimeters away, the facial features were more defined, much closer to his. Subtle details emerged, the jawline, the shape of the eyes, even the slight scar above the eyebrow that Daniel had since childhood. It wasn't just copying the appearance, I was rebuilding my identity. Daniel slowly backed away until he was against the metal structure in the center of the room. The cold currents touched his arm, and at that moment, a memory emerged, not as a souvenir, but as recognition. The notebooks, the notes, Edward Holloway. He wasn't studying that, he was trying to contain it. Daniel glanced quickly at the chains, for the mechanisms, for floor mounting. Everything there made sense now. That structure was not a prison for victims. It was an attempt to interrupt the process, but it failed, or it was abandoned before it could function. The creature tilted its head, as if it sensed the change in his thinking. "I understand," she said, her voice almost perfect. Daniel did not answer, but his eyes no longer showed only fear. They showed the calculation. He began to move slowly around the structure. The creature followed, mirroring, learning, every step, each adjustment. Daniel realized something important. She didn't anticipate it. She reacted. It depended on him. This was still an advantage, small, but it's real. He took another step. It stopped. The creature did the same. Exactly, necessary, but with a minimal delay, a delay that didn't exist before. That meant something. It wasn't complete yet. I still needed him. Daniel clenched his jaw, and then he made a decision, risky, perhaps the only possible one. He moved abruptly, fast, turning the body and pulling one of the chains forcefully. The metal is bright red. The creature reacted, but not immediately. The delay has increased. For a fraction of a second, she hesitated. and that was enough. Daniel threw the chain toward the creature's arm. The contact was strange, not solid, not entirely physical, but the current enveloped it, as if something were trying to hold itself together by force. The creature made a sound, not a scream, but that's a distortion, like multiple voices failing at the same time. Daniel pulled hard, trapping the chain in the structure. Another quick move, another current, another point of contention. The creature began to fall apart. The shape trembled. It wavered between faces, between versions, between failures, but it didn't disappear. She adapted. He always adapted. Daniel stepped back, breathless. The currents vibrated. Oh, heavenly metal, but they were holding on. For now, the creature slowly raised its face, now almost identical to his, almost perfect, except for the eyes. The eyes were still wrong, too deep, too empty. No, not enough, he said with difficulty. Daniel felt the weight of those words. That wasn't defeat, it was analysis. The creature was learning through containment, adapting to the limitation. And then something changed. The walls of the room began to react again. The scratches, the words, everything is moving slowly, reorganizing, as if the structure itself were helping or correcting myself. Daniel looked around, and he realized something terrifying. The messages on the walls were changing. Before, "Don't answer," now, "Don't fight." He took a step back. Understanding came quickly. That was not just a passive environment. The mansion. I was standing beside the creature. It always has been. The structure was not a natural prison. It was interference, a human attempt at control, which the house itself was invalidating. The currents began to loosen, slowly, without him touching them. Daniel pulled again. He tried to reinforce it, but the metal seemed to give way, not by force, but willingly. The creature stopped resisting. He remained motionless, observing, learning, waiting, as if he knew he didn't need to do anything. Daniel felt the despair growing. There was no longer any advantage. Each of his actions only accelerated the process. Every attempt at resistance, it was just another piece of data, another lesson learned, one more step towards the end. The creature tilted its head one last time, and in a voice now almost indistinguishable from his own, he said, "Thanks." The chains fell, one by one, without resistance, effortless, as if they had never been needed. Daniel stood still, no immediate reaction, the mind trying to find a way out that no longer existed, and then he realized something final, something quiet. Absolutely. The creature was no longer imitating. She was completed. Daniel did not back down. Even with everything lost, even with the creature now complete, stable, too perfect to be ignored, something inside him refused to accept the end in that way. Not out of courage, but by instinct, pure survival. The creature in front of him did not move. He did not attack. He just waited. As if I already had everything I needed, as if the next step didn't depend on her, but from him. Daniel took a deep breath, once, two, forcing the body to slow down. If that was a system, so there were rules. And rules could be explored. He closed his eyes for a second. He reorganized his thinking. Everything that had happened up to that point pointed to a single thing. The creature did not replace by force. She needed alignment, recognition, confirmation. She learned, she copied, but she didn't finish without one last step. A kind of acceptance, perhaps unconsciously, perhaps inevitable, but still necessary. Daniel opened his eyes, and he did something unexpected. He relaxed his body. The tension in my shoulders decreased. His breathing stabilized. He stopped resisting. The creature reacted immediately. Her attitude changed, less rigid, more synchronized, like a mirror that finally finds its balance. Daniel stepped forward. This is it. Controlled. The creature did the same. No delay. Flawless. Perfect. But that was not a victory, it was evidence. She still depended on him. I still needed to follow up. It was still plugged in. Daniel tilted his head slightly. The creature repeated itself. Exactly. He raised his hand. She too. The movements were identical, but now there was no delay, no flaws, no visible difference, and it was at that moment that Daniel understood the final detail, the most important thing. The creature did not exist independently. She needed an active role model, a working model. Without that, she couldn't fully support herself. That was why nobody went out, not because they were dead, but because they were replaced while they were still there, maintained as a basis until the process is finished, and then discarded. Daniel felt the weight of the discovery, but for the first time since he entered the mansion, he saw an opportunity, not an escape, but a rupture. He needed to break the bond, interrupt the frame of reference, if it depended on his mind. So the path wasn't physical, it was internal, risky, perhaps impossible, but it was the only option left. He closed his eyes again. He ignored the creature, he ignored the surroundings, he ignored everything. He focused on only one thing: silence. Not external, internal, no answers, no reaction, without an active identity. He began to empty his thoughts, one by one. Memories, reactions, fears, everything is being pushed away. It was as if one was switching off their own consciousness. Gradually, the world around them seemed to weaken. The sounds faded. The sensation of the body faded. And something changed. The creature did not move, but its shape began to waver again, subtle, almost imperceptible. Daniel stayed focused, deeper, more empty, more silence. The creature tried to adjust, he tried to keep up, but there was no longer a standard, there was no further response. There were no more active Daniel files to copy. The lines began to fade, the face lost definition, the eyes were wrong again. The voices, once perfect, began to overlap again, disorganized, unstable. A distorted sound filled the room, like a system failing. Daniel remained motionless, controlled breathing, empty mind. The surrounding structure began to react. The walls trembled slightly. The scratches seemed to be fading away. The words disappeared, as if the place itself were losing its bearings. The creature took a step forward, but the move was wrong, misaligned. Like before, like in the beginning. She tried to speak, but the words did not form, just noise. Daniel maintained his state. Even when the body is asking for a reaction, even with my instinct screaming at me to run away, he didn't move, he didn't think, he didn't answer. And then the creature collapsed, not in a physical impact, but in disarray. The form dissolved into something undefined, as if he had never managed to fully settle down. Silence returned, different, more empty, more real. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. The room was there, but different, simpler, less oppressive. The immobile currents, static walls. Nothing was moving. He noticed nothing. I learned nothing. He took a deep breath for the first time, weightless. But something was still unresolved. He could feel it, not as a presence, but as a consequence. He didn't win. He interrupted. And that, it came at a price. Daniel remained motionless for a few seconds after opening his eyes. The silence was real. For the first time since entering the mansion, there was no sense of being watched. No lurking presence. No invisible response echoing his actions. But there was no complete relief either. Something was wrong. Not in the environment, in him. He put his hand to his head, a slight dizziness, nothing serious, but persistent, as if something had been abruptly switched off. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, and then looked around. The underground room seemed smaller now, simpler. The metal structure in the center remained motionless, inert, just scrap iron, without any apparent influence. The walls were clean, free of the scratches and messages that had once covered every surface. It was as if none of that had ever existed. Or worse, as if it had been erased. Daniel took a step toward the hallway. I needed to leave. Now. Without hesitation, without looking back. The staircase was still there, exactly as it had been before, but something caught his attention. The steps. Now they were clean, no marks, no signs of use, with no indication that anyone had ever been there before. He went up, slow down at first, then faster, each step echoing naturally, finally natural. When he reached the top, he stopped. The hallway in the mansion was different. The doors were locked, all aligned, silent, just like the moment he walked in. Daniel walked to the main room. The Holloway family portrait was still on the wall, but without the risk on the boy's face. No changes. No movement. The house seemed normal, abandoned, empty. He approached the main door. The doorknob turned. Without resistance, the door opened. Outside, air entered immediately. Fresco, vivo, real. Daniel left. The sun was low on the horizon, tinging the sky with orange hues. The surrounding forest seemed ordinary now, just trees, a light breeze, natural sounds. No isolation, no pressure. He walked to the car. Each step becomes lighter, each breath becomes easier. He opened the door. He sat down. He stood there for a few seconds, motionless, looking at the mansion through the windshield. She seemed small, harmless. Like any abandoned building, nothing indicated what was inside. Nothing gave away what had happened. Daniel picked up the recorder. He pressed the button. He reproduced the last recording. Field notes, Holloway Manor, a Voz era deal. But something was wrong, slightly out of rhythm, slightly misaligned. The basement door was found open. Daniel frowned. He didn't remember speaking exactly that way. The recording continued, but then something appeared that shouldn't have been there. Another voice, overlapping, subtle, almost imperceptible, but present, repeating, adjusting, imitating. Daniel turned off the recorder immediately. My heart raced. He took a deep breath. He tried to rationalize, perhaps interference, perhaps an echo, perhaps... He froze, in the reflection of the rearview mirror, for a second, just a second. He didn't just see himself. There was a misalignment, a slight delay in movement, as if the reflex wasn't completely synchronized. Daniel turned around quickly. The back seat was empty. He turned his gaze back to the mirror. Everything's normal, exactly as it should be. He swallowed hard. He started the car. The engine responded immediately. A real sound, concrete, reliable. He set the car in motion. He left the property without looking back again. The road seemed shorter now, more direct. As if the path had been adjusted, or perhaps he simply wasn't being stopped anymore. Minutes later, the mansion disappeared from sight. Daniel continued driving, non-stop, without hesitation, without speaking, but little by little. Something began to emerge. First, subtle. Later it became clearer. A thought, which didn't seem entirely like him, simple, direct, persistent. Times. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. He ignored it. He focused on the road. But the thought returned. Stronger, more clearly defined. Times. Daniel took a deep breath. He tried to focus on something else, but it was no use. That was not a common idea. There was no doubt. It was an instruction. And then came the worst. Not like a voice, not like sound, but for sure. He hadn't left everything behind. Something went wrong with him. And at that moment, Daniel realized the process was not interrupted, just transferred. Daniel didn't know how long he had been driving. Minutes, hours. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the world had been reduced to mere movement and silence. But inside it, nothing was silent. The thought persisted. Times. not as an external voice, but like a certainty that seeped into his own thoughts. Subtle, insistent, undeniable. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. "No," she murmured, trying to assert something that no longer seemed entirely under her control. The car was moving forward, but his perception was beginning to fail. Minor lapses, minor delays. He blinked and couldn't remember the last stretch of the road. She was breathing, and the rhythm seemed slightly out of sync. Daniel looked at the panel. Steady speed. Motor normal. Everything is working, except for him. He picked up his cell phone with one hand, without taking his eyes off the road, and activated the front camera. I needed to see it. Confirm. The screen lit up. For a second, everything seemed normal. Your face, tired, tense, real. But then, a delay, 1 microsecond. The reflection blinked. After him. Daniel froze. The cell phone almost fell out of his hand. He looked directly at the screen. He tried to blink in a controlled manner. This time, it was simultaneous, perfect as it should be. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but something inside him already knew. That wasn't a technical glitch. It was an adaptation. Things were synchronizing. He turned off his cell phone. He played on the bench next to him. And then he made a decision. He braked suddenly. The car stopped in the middle of the road. Silence returned. Heavy. Absolute. Daniel remained motionless for a few seconds. Then he turned off the engine. The sound stopped completely. Now there was nothing. Only him, and whatever was inside it. "You didn't leave," she said in a low voice. Silence. But not empty. He closed his eyes, and he listened, not with the ears, but with something deeper. Never. The answer came from within. No echo. Without distortion. Direct. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. Now there was no longer any doubt. That wasn't around him. I was in it, learning, adjusting, waiting for the final moment. He got out of the car. The cold night air hit his face. The sky darkened. The road was empty. No sign of life. He walked a few steps away from the vehicle. Every movement now seemed shared, as if he were not alone inside his own body. He raised his hand, and he felt it. A slight delay. Internal. Almost imperceptible, but it's real. "You need me," he said, testing the waters. Silence for a moment. After, "Yes," the answer came again. Clearer. Firmer. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought quickly. Everything you learned. Everything you saw. The creature was not independent. She needed a point of reference, a host, an active mind. Without that, she was incomplete. It didn't hold up. It didn't exist. He took a deep breath, and then he understood what needed to be done. There was no way out. There was no escape, but there was a choice. He went back to the car. He opened the trunk. He searched quickly. He found what he needed, a small gallon of spare fuel. He always carried one, just in case. Now, out of necessity, he looked at the car, then onto the road, then for himself. "If I stop, you stop," he said. Silence. "It's longer this time." As if it were analyzing. "No. Necessary. Error. Small. Of course, it wasn't perfect yet. It wasn't finished yet." Daniel opened the gallon jug. The strong smell of fuel filled the air. He did not hesitate. It spilled on the clothes, about the hands, about the ground all around. Every movement was firm, decided. The thing inside him reacted. And discomfort, an impulse. No. Now the word came with urgency, for the first time. Daniel smiled slightly. "You need me." Silence. More intense. More pressure. Yes. Now there was no more disguise. That was true. Simple. Direct. Daniel took the lighter out of his pocket. It twirled between his fingers. He looked at the extinguished flame, and then he spoke for the last time. "So you're coming with me." He lit it. The flame appeared small, but enough. For a moment, everything stood still. Time suspended, the irreversible decision. And then he dropped the lighter. The fire spread quickly, violent, consuming the fuel, climbing up through the clothes, through the skin. Daniel didn't shout. The pain existed. But it was swallowed up by something bigger, silence, internal, total. And in that silence, things went wrong. No reference, no response. Without the active awareness to copy, she couldn't support herself, he couldn't complete it. It was not able to exist. The fire consumed everything, fast, final, and for the first time since entering the mansion. He didn't answer. He observed nothing. He learned nothing. The fire was visible from miles away. An irregular column of flames cut through the darkness of the deserted road, consuming not only the car, but everything around it, as if that specific spot had been chosen to disappear from the world. Hours later, when the authorities arrived, only wreckage remained, twisted metal, ashes scattered, and silence. No clear signs of a struggle, no immediate explanation. The initial report was simple: accident, possible mechanical failure. Spontaneous fire exacerbated by fuel being transported in the vehicle. Case closed, but not everyone accepted that conclusion. Some details didn't fit. The car was stopped in the middle of the road, no signs of hard braking, no escape attempt. And the strangest thing, the recorder was found among the wreckage, partially damaged, but it's still functional. The content was analyzed, archived, and quickly ignored. Officially, unofficially, it circulated. The recording started normally. Daniel's voice describing the mansion, the records, the notes, but as the audio progressed, something changed, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A second layer of voice, slightly misaligned, repeating, correcting, learning. In one of the final segments, the difference was impossible to ignore. The main voice said, "Registration closed," and half a second later, another voice, identical, repeated, "Registration closed," but without emotion, breathless, lifeless. The file was classified as technical interference, noise, recording error, nothing more than that. Officially, Holloway Mansion was also investigated. Days after the incident, a team was sent to the location, but what they found did not match the reports. The house was there, abandoned, empty, no signs of recent activity, no marks, no records, with nothing to indicate any unusual event. The interior was simple, empty rooms, antique furniture, no secret staircase, no basement, no underground chambers. The structure seemed incomplete, as if parts of the house had never existed, or they had been removed. The final report concluded, old property. No relevant historical value, no risk, no interest. The place was left as it was, forgotten again, but not everything has disappeared. A few months later, a new record emerged, in another state, another city, another context. A researcher, historian, specialist in forgotten properties. His name wasn't Daniel. But the profile, it was almost identical. Interests, the methods, the standards, everything is too similar to be a coincidence. He began investigating abandoned places, records deleted, incomplete stories. And then, in one of his research projects, he found a reference, a name, almost illegible in an old document, Holloway. He stopped. He stared at the name for longer than he should have. Something there seemed familiar. Not as a souvenir, but how? Recognition. He didn't know why. But he decided to investigate. Days later, I was driving along a little used road, surrounded by trees, no signal on recent maps. The car stopped in front of a rusty gate, an ancient coat of arms, almost erased. But it's still present. The mansion appeared in the background, impressive, silent, waiting. The man turned off the car. He stared for a few seconds, without knowing exactly what she felt. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper, something that wasn't entirely his. He opened the door. It went out, and he walked to the gate without hesitation, without question, as if that path had already been traveled before, as if that story, it had never really ended. Years later, Holloway Manor was still off the map, officially forgotten, unofficially, never empty. Reports surfaced occasionally, always vague, always inconsistent. Drivers who claimed to have seen a road that didn't appear on their GPS. Researchers mentioned incomplete files with names repeated in different contexts. And sometimes recordings, short audio clips fragmented, with duplicated voices, slightly misaligned, never confirmed, never explained, but always present. The mansion remained, silent, intact, waiting, not because of victims, but by reference, and somewhere, someone always found a way, without knowing exactly why, without noticing the pattern, without understanding the cycle. And when I got there, the story did not begin again. She just kept going. And now I want to know from you, if you were in Daniel's place, would you have gone down those stairs, or would he have left at the first sign that something was wrong? This story leaves us with a troubling question. To what extent can curiosity take us? And when does it cease to be a choice? Comment below what you would do, and more importantly, at what point you think everything was beyond repair. If you enjoy mystery and horror stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And tell me also, where are you watching from? Who knows? Maybe your next story begins there.